was a very serious disconnect between BPD and DJS.
Shocking allegations from the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office.
It appeared that there had been approximately over 100 cases that couldn't be found by DJS.
Dozens of cases of juvenile crime unaccounted for. It's just the latest controversy surrounding the Department of Juvenile Services. I'm going in depth with an exclusive investigation into these claims. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost. This week, we begin with a report you're only seeing here. Juvenile Division Assistant State's Attorney Catherine Rosenblatt telling me more than 100 cases from the Baltimore Police Department that they sent to the Department of Juvenile Services were unaccounted for. Here's my exclusive investigation. In Maryland, young people can face charges a few different ways. By getting arrested, brought in, and the Department of Juvenile Services intake employee decides to either move forward with the case or offer a diversion program with services. Or a paper referral can be made by police to DJS. And that's where Kate Rosenblatt, Deputy Chief of the Juvenile Division at the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, says the miscommunication happened with more than 100 cases.
It did come to our attention a few months ago that there was a very serious disconnect between BPD and DJS.
Rosenblatt says when those documents are usually sent to DJS, her office, along with the Baltimore Police Department, follow up to find out if DJS will move forward with charges.
It appeared that there had been that there had been over 100 cases that had gone missing that couldn't be found by DJS.
That's pretty alarming.
Yes. BPD has done a thorough review of their cases to find out which ones specifically went missing and have met with DJS to go through and try and figure out where all of the cases were in the process. BPD is going to resubmit the cases, and DJS has agreed that all felonies will be processed per the statute, and so the crimes of violence will come to the state's attorney's office, that misdemeanors will be processed under the statute if the youth is under current supervision.
Rosenblatt says if the youth is not under active supervision and it's a misdemeanor case,
then DJS will check on the youth to determine if there are service needs. So that case still may get diverted.
Do you know what the percentages of those roughly 100 cases involve felonies or misdemeanors?
We don't.
Have you ever seen something like this happen in your experience?
I haven't, no.
How do cases go missing?
My understanding is there was a communication breakdown in that there may have been a wrong email that was given to BPD. And so BPD was submitting cases, and they were just going perhaps into the ether. They weren't getting reviewed.
Do statute of limitations play a role in this at all? Is that a concern?
It is when it comes to the misdemeanor cases. The felony cases, not so much. What's also very concerning is, of course, for that time, victims of these cases have had no idea what happened. Right? They've been victimized. They've sort of done their part. They've called the police. They've followed up. The police have done their part as well. They filed reports. They filed charges. And then it's just disappeared, and the victims haven't heard anything. And that is unacceptable. And from a prosecuting standpoint, we have to hope that the contact information is still good for them, and that they haven't been so disenfranchised by how the system has treated them thus far that they want nothing to do with it.
DJS making it clear they say the cases are not lost. In a statement to Fox 45 News, a spokesperson says, quote, DJS and BPD worked together to identify referrals that were impacted by a typo in an email address from many years ago, recently discovered, and corrected the routing procedure and are processing the cases appropriately. Now, I reached out to the Baltimore Police Department for a comment on the situation. I have not heard back. Joining us now live is defense attorney Jeremy Eldredge. Jeremy, thanks for joining us here to talk about this. I want to first get your thoughts on this news. DJS says this was all because of a typo, but how can that be possible?
Before you even get to the impact on the juvenile who would be like a criminal defendant, or you get to the victimization part, you first have to address the obvious privacy concern, which is why was BPD, why was the Baltimore City Police Department using email to convey serious criminal cases with juvenile and their parents' private information by email when we don't do that in any other field? We don't do that with financial records in the criminal justice system. We don't do it. We redact records with regard to people's healthcare or HIPAA concerns. So here, that's where you have to start, which is why was email the mode of communication chosen when there's so obviously a failure like this that could have been expected? The second part of it that you brought up is for all of the victims here, if there's a statute of limitations issue, meaning if there's an inability to prosecute these cases because they occurred over 365 days ago, which is most misdemeanors in the state of Maryland, that means there are going to be people, victims, who cases, not only will the cases never see the light of day, if you were entitled to restitution for your vehicle being stolen or damaged, you're never going to get that restitution. You're never going to see accountability in court. And so while some of these young people who would have been charged with crimes are the obvious beneficiaries here, because based on speedy trial or statute of limitations, their cases will never see the light of the day, we have victims who have been waiting in the wings for a year and will never see resolution of their cases. And that is painful and decreases already the distrust we have between the community and the police department and obviously DJS.
Yeah, the email aspect of this was a little surprising to me, and I'm sure other people at home when they learn about this. In your experience in the courtroom and in, both sides of the litigation process of this, have you ever heard of emails really being used in this type of way when it comes to the decision possibly being made about moving forward with charges?
No, not whatsoever. I mean, when you're talking about the federal system, we have PACER and ECF that are filing systems. On the Maryland side, until this year, 23 counties, excluding Baltimore City, the 24th, were on the Maryland electronic filing system. With the advent of technology, there was no reason whatsoever why email was the mode of communication used here. They could have been using other file sharing systems that had a check and balance. I mean, even emails with read receipts. I mean, the very obvious questions for anyone that uses email that's been in existence for 50 or 60 years at this point aren't being asked. Why weren't there read receipts? Why did it take so long for anyone to figure this out? What happened to all the correspondence with victims that normally would happen in these cases? The Office of the State's Attorney should not have been the one having to be responsible for figuring out this deficiency. And for everyone to say now, especially DJS, oh, well, nothing's wrong, nothing happened, I'd really wonder if I was the victim of a crime, how I would feel that my case can't move forward if it's a misdemeanor, or if it's a felony, that, oh, nothing's happened with my daughter's sexual assault or my carjacking. That's absurd.
Looking forward, what do you think needs to happen? Do you anticipate that there will be some sort of policy change or a new system put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
There has to be a policy change. And it doesn't matter how minimal the crime is or how serious the crime is. But the fact that we're using email for charging decisions or to convey charging documents is absurd. And frankly, is a giant privacy concern for the juveniles that are being charged, because their information shouldn't be sent by email without being redacted. So that change has to happen regardless of what we're talking about. And we have to put checks and balances in place to make sure that these documents are being conveyed not only lawfully, but that someone's actually paying attention on the other end, or like the assistant state's attorney who was interviewed said, everything's just going into the ether and nothing's actually being done.
With lawmakers talking about their concerns surrounding privacy for these young people, we'll have to wait and see if anyone has a comment on this new reporting or if they plan to introduce any legislation come January when session begins to perhaps put those checks and balances in place like you were just talking about. Jeremy Eldredge, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll continue this conversation as more people start to react to this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we'll take a closer look at the issue surrounding DJS's intake process and the ongoing concern about DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi. And as we head to break, let's take a look at some of today's top headlines.
The Maryland Child Alliance and Renew Baltimore are heading to the state Supreme Court with the same goal in mind: get their charter amendments on the November ballot.
Are we expecting to rule in our favor?
Hundreds of outraged state retirees, many with their walkers and canes in tow, gathering for a briefing and update on the fight to preserve their current prescription drug plan. This letter, sent out in January, was the first time many were made aware of the change, but the decision dates way back to 2011. That's when the Maryland General Assembly passed the bill, downgrading retirees' drug coverage from the state's plan to the federal Medicare Part D. The shift would save Maryland millions, but retirees argue it would cost them access to life-saving medications when they need it most.
Intelligence officials have repeatedly put out warnings this year and in the wake of October 7th about the potential ripple effects of war in the Middle East and how it could drive terror around the world. There were 736 terror watch list suspects caught at America's borders last year. With 6 weeks left to go in this fiscal year, there have been 361 apprehensions.
Monitoring, and we have heard several examples of young people committing crimes while on ankle bracelets and under DJS supervision. That includes Tristan Jackson, one of the teens charged in connection to the Brooklyn Day mass shooting in Baltimore City. Authorities say he was wearing an ankle monitor at the time of the shooting. Then there's intake. We have heard of juvenile offenders being released to their parents time and time again without facing charges, and that has led to frustration from police officers, victims, and prosecutors in the city state's attorney's office. During a town hall back in December, Assistant State's Attorney Kate Rosenblatt got into a heated disagreement with DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi over data.
There are differences of opinions up here. There are also some differences of fact. So I guess I got to go to that for a second. We must refer violent cases to the state's attorney's office. So I think the examples Ms. Rosenblatt gave were of violent offenses that we diverted. I guess I'm going to say we have a difference of fact there. We are not allowed to divert a kid brought in on a violent case.
Secretary Schiraldi, I would really love to see your data.
Absolutely.
Because, and this is from 22.
Yeah, and you're going to see the next one in less than a month. I'd like to see some data from you, though. I'm not really hearing too much data from your office.
Now, the intake process within the Department of Juvenile Services remains a frustration point for some, especially when it comes to the apparent lack of transparency surrounding how decisions are made about cases.
In December, you said that DJS acts like a gatekeeper when it comes to charges for young people. Is that still the case?
It is. We don't have an immediate say on whether we'll be taking the case or not. There's that sort of interim of DJS that makes that decision.
And will that change come November when the changes take effect with the new juvenile justice laws?
DJS will still be in that sort of middleman position. However, what's been tweaked is the way that cases will come through. But they had about 25 days to make a decision as to whether to divert a case or forward a case. Now, starting in November 1, they only have 15 days, so they only have 3 weeks to make a decision. Additionally, currently, they only had to forward the cases to the state's attorney's office that were crimes of violence, and that would sometimes leave out felonies that we were seeing high numbers of, like motor vehicle thefts. Motor vehicle theft is not a crime of violence, so DJS did have the authority to divert those cases. Come November 1st, any felony has to be forwarded to the state's attorney's office. DJS can still advise us, we would like to divert this case, but they have to let us know.
By the time the new changes in the laws take effect in November, do you anticipate that there will be an influx in more cases in your office, in state's attorney's offices across the state?
Yes, I do. We expect to see a good deal more burglaries and a good deal more motor vehicle thefts. we do also sometimes see a commonality with repeat offenders on those crimes. So we are expecting to get a lot of cases in November and December and into the new year.
What are you seeing now? Are we still seeing some of the same repeat offenders, young people coming in, the catch and release cycle that we had heard about for so long? Is that still taking place?
Unfortunately, yes. We have seen some kids come in that either because of the lag or because of a lack of supervision or a lack of structure in their home life or community life, they simply commit over and over and over again. And they feels very much like they're caught up in the churn of the system. And it's frustrating, I think, for all involved to try and intercede and break that that habit.
Do you think that the changes that are coming, will that help?
I do. I am cautiously optimistic that the changes that we're seeing to juvenile law will improve how things work.
Sure.
I think the shorter timeline will be beneficial for everybody involved.
Now, Rosenblatt says there are still examples of intake decisions being made to divert cases when she says should not be diverted.
Sometimes DJS would then forward us the case that they diverted as a failure. However, there was not consistency with that. Sometimes we'd get the case, sometimes we wouldn't. We did also find through cases where diversion did not work that there were cases being diverted that were not supposed to be diverted.
Like what?
Like robberies. There were a couple of instances where youth had committed robberies, which are violent crimes, and therefore should have been forwarded to the state's attorney's office. But instead the DJS had diverted the case.
Now, another concern surrounding DJS is its leader, Secretary Vincent Schiraldi. Critics take issue with his track record and philosophies. We're taking a closer look at those concerns.
They start to sort of think of themselves as little 12-year-old thugs.
From the start of Vincent Schiraldi's time in Maryland, he's been in the spotlight. Throughout his confirmation process, the Washington Post op-ed he co-wrote nearly a decade ago was a hot topic. In it, Schiraldi discussing brain development, making the case that young people's brains are not fully developed until 21, maybe even 25, and therefore should not have their cases heard in adult court. During his first on-camera interview in May of 2023, Schiraldi did not see his past comments as an issue.
As a secretary for an agency plagued with problems, do you see their concerns?
Many agencies are plagued with problems. If you ask most of your viewers, how different were you, particularly the men, at the age of 17 versus the age of 19? Were you dramatically more ready to engage in adult responsibility and adult behaviors when you were a freshman or a sophomore in college than you were when you were a senior in high school? I think most people would say no.
But concerns don't stop at Schiraldi's views on the juvenile court system. At a Harvard event while promoting his new book, Schiraldi's supporting research considering abolishing probation and parole.
One of the two things probation and parole are supposed to do is keep us safer. Parole made us less safer. Probation had no impact.
We're not really holding young people accountable the way we should.
State Senator Justin Reedy, one of the 13 Republican lawmakers voting against Schiraldi's confirmation.
I think that his philosophy is one that is part of the problem in overall criminal justice, but particularly juvenile justice.
On a party line vote, Schiraldi was confirmed. The vote coming with cautionary words even from Democrats.
I'm supporting this nominee, but I do have words of caution for this department and for this nominee.
As he found his footing in his new role, more problems emerged from Schiraldi's past. Before coming to Maryland, he was tasked with leading the Department of Corrections in New York City, including running Rikers Island, which Schiraldi called for the closure of. FOX45 News speaking with former co-workers of Schiraldi in New York City who allege he pushed the system to the brink.
I've been a correction officer for 25 years. And Schiraldi was probably the worst commissioner we've had in my tenure.
In the 7 months Schiraldi ran the department, Benny Basio, president of the Correctional Officers Union in New York City, says accountability wasn't for everyone under Schiraldi's watch.
He came in here with this mindset of providing everything for the inmate population and not providing things that we needed. Wasn't concerned about our well-being at all. So he made it unsafe for us. He created armies in these housing areas. He really put us at a very disadvantage and made the job more dangerous than it ever was.
And New York City Councilman Robert Holden agrees, writing on social media, how could anyone even think of letting Schiraldi run their jails? He couldn't run a hot dog stand.
I can't believe somebody would hire this guy. To what we've been through in New York City. It just shows you there was a lack of really vetting this person.
Before moving to the Big Apple, Schiraldi worked in the nation's capital. According to this Inspector General investigation from Washington, D.C., Schiraldi violated major security procedures while running the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services. The violation stemming from the unrestrained transport of 3 offenders from a max security facility. The juveniles transported to Schiraldi's home for a cookout, where, according to the report, 1 juvenile escaped. 22 days later, that juvenile offender was captured. The investigation determined Schiraldi violated the very policies he was tasked to implement. Now, as you heard, the new juvenile crime plan extends probation for juvenile offenders, but at a speech at Harvard, Schiraldi promoted ending probation altogether. So we asked him whether he supports the new juvenile crime legislation.
This administration supports the juvenile crime legislation. We need a balanced approach where we help kids turn their lives around, but we also sort of hold them accountable. I'm 100% behind the governor on that.
And you think this will do that, hold juveniles more accountable?
I think there's way more than just legislation that has to do that. We have to administer this department in a way that holds them accountable and us accountable.
Now, despite Schiraldi's public endorsement of the new juvenile crime plan, questions still remain over whether he's willing to enact the changes inside DJS. It's important to note Schiraldi was absent when the bill was first introduced and when it was signed into law. Despite that, Governor Wes Moore has stood by Schiraldi and says the secretary supports the Moore administration's priorities and policies.
Now, we still have a lot of work to do, but if there's anyone who is up to the job, it's our Secretary of Juvenile Services, Vinny Schiraldi. While we might have people within the administration who might in other jobs have said X, Y, or Z, we're also very clear that we're one team here, and these are policies that are going to be followed within our administration with me as the team captain.
Wes Moore and Vincent Schiraldi met while they both worked in New York City. In Schiraldi's latest book, he thanked the Robin Hood Foundation for providing the funding for the book's research. Governor Moore was the longtime leader of that foundation, and in 2021, Moore and Schiraldi both appeared in a Brennan Center for Justice report titled, quote, Poverty and Mass Incarceration in New York City. Now, I reached out to Schiraldi for an interview for this show right now, and DJS declined. The Attorney General's Juvenile Justice Monitoring Report for the first quarter shows 2024 shows an increase in incidents inside DJS-operated detention centers. According to that report, fights among young people increased 53% compared to the first quarter 2023 at the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center. The average daily population also increased by 56% at the Baltimore City Center. And the Attorney General's office reports a population increase across the board at all DJS-operated detention centers. Contraband incidents also doubled in Baltimore City, and physical restraints of youth by staff increased at all detention centers except the Lower Eastern Shore. Suicidal ideation nearly doubled across the board, with 29 incidents compared to 15 this time last year. The AG monitoring team claims DJS continues to struggle to recruit and retain qualified mental health staff. Now, DJS responding to that report, saying it's working to improve conditions. Some of those improvements include innovation teams at 3 of its detention centers, made up of staff and youth focus groups to help implement new policies. DJS says it has also updated its treatment programs by hiring a clinically licensed regional supervisor and implementing pending placement units for youth awaiting DJS placement to begin treatment for trauma and mental health issues. Now, this week we asked if you trust the Department of Juvenile Services to do what's best for both juvenile offenders and the community. We have a lot of responses. We'll take a look at some of those when we come back. Now, we asked if you trust the Department of Juvenile Services to do what's best for both juvenile offenders and the community. Let's take a look at some of your responses. Most people said no, but I want to start with one person, Roy, who says yes, so long as they pay attention and if the services they are given takes, he says, they'll be fine when they turn 18. Other people, though, say there must be an engagement with the family to make sure they get to the root causes of this. Stop emboldening these juveniles. Harsher penalties are required. Have they yet? How can you trust something that they have yet to accomplish? Thank you all for showing us your opinions. Please keep that coming. That's all for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost. Mary?
I'm Kai Jackson. Thank you for watching. Here's another video to watch. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel.